So I love trading big horse races, and by big I mean the high profile stuff. Your Cheltenham Festivals, your Royal Ascot, the Guineas. I mean, there are so many, but also things like the Melbourne Cup, the Breeders' Cup, the Prix de Triomphe. There are so many of these big races that take place over the course of the whole season. But it's important to understand why I like those races, but also how they vary from day to day Betfair trading, because the key to understanding that will help you trade them an awful lot better. I've been successfully betting and trading for over 2 decades. If you want more videos like this and you want me to describe more of what I do, then give us a like. If you want to talk to like-minded people, visit the BetAngel forum where you can do exactly that, but also visit our website where you can download a free trial of BetAngel. So the big race meetings are the ones where you see me get pretty spectacular results. You know, they could be a whole string of positives. They could be just one race that's absolutely huge, and you know, you see me post some very, very large numbers during these big race meetings. But there's a simple reason for that, and that is that they sort of create very good trading conditions overall. And by good trading conditions, you know, there are many different facets to it, which we'll explore in a second. But for example, if we look at trading from a base perspective, what you're looking at is, you know, you want to get matched on 2 different prices. Now, it could be a strong move, it could be a narrow traded range. There could be many different ways that you're looking to take advantage of that. But fundamentally speaking, if there's a lot of money going through the market, then you get very good liquidity. And it's important that we start with volume and liquidity, because you can have a market that has substantial volume but no liquidity. And that is because when we talk about volume, we're talking about that number at the top right of the Betfair screen, which is the amount of money that's been matched on that individual market. So ideally you want a market that has high volume, and of course the big race meetings and those big races will have those big numbers. But liquidity is a different thing altogether, because liquidity is the amount of money that's getting matched at any particular moment in time. And the two of these sort of fit together, because when we're actively trading, say we put an order into the market and we're waiting for that order to get matched, or perhaps we're waiting for a closing order to get matched. The ideal scenario is that those orders get matched really, really quickly. So for that, we need volume, we need loads of money going through the market, or expected to go through the market. But more importantly, we need liquidity. The amount of money that's getting matched per second needs to be relatively high, because that will reduce your overall risk. You could put some money into the market and you sort of think, no, I'm not sure about that. So you could scratch your trade. You could put the order back in at the price at which you opened and just get out for zero. That's possible to do when you have good liquidity in a market. But when you have poor liquidity, you may be stuck with that position in the market, and that may start moving against you. So good volume is a big plus. You always get that at these big meetings. You know, if you get a race like the Derby at Epsom, that will do massive volume. And therefore, you know, that's a target meeting. But the liquidity answer is a little bit different. We'll talk about this in a second, because liquidity can be high at certain times of the day and not at others. So yeah, timing your entry to the market is always important when trading. But typically, most of these big races where you see me get these big results have good volume and good liquidity. So when we look at the average traded range, when we look at how volatile each individual market is, they tend to be much lower. I was going to use the word crush when I described that. You know, the volatility gets crushed by big races, and in some of those races it will get crushed. But typically the best way to express it is that, you know, if you had a traded range that's this big, typically it will be like this big, or maybe even a third of the normal size. Average amounts waiting to be matched at something like Cheltenham will be about 9 to 10 times as much as you'd see in a normal race. And one of the reasons that the volatility isn't as high and that the prices are more stable is simply because all of these horses are at the top of their game. They're well known, well researched, people have a stronger opinion on it, and you can price the markets just that little bit better. It's a very high quality horse at the top of its ratings in its particular category. Most people will have an opinion on what the price should be, but if you look at that race at Wolverhampton in the winter when it's snowing and it's a maiden on a Thursday evening, that price could go pretty much anywhere. So, you know, that poses a problem, but it also has a nice solution for you as well, in that if the price is only going to move in a range that's this size instead of that size, then it won't go against you so badly. But also, if you think about it, you won't be able to make as much if you're using the same amount of stakes that you would use in a normal race. So therefore, the only solution is to up your stakes. You will have to use larger stakes if you're going to get a decent result out of these meetings. There's just sort of no particular way around that. However, having said that, if you know the traded range is quite narrow, then there's no reason why you couldn't put an order, and if liquidity is high as well, put an order in the market, take it out, put another one, take it out, put it out. And that will allow you to overcome that, I need to use bigger stakes. But there's also one other thing that will help you overcome that characteristics as well when you're trading some of those big races at these big meetings. So, if we have a narrower traded range, if you're going to get the same amount of money that you would do out of a much bigger traded range, you're going to have to increase your stake. However, there is another solution and something that is beneficial when you're looking at a large race or race meeting. So when we look at Cheltenham, for example, something interesting happens. If we're active on a day-to-day racing market, there's only going to be decent liquidity in the last 5 to 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer depending upon what type of race it is and so on. But yeah, you're going to be trading quite late on that particular race, and you probably want to be out by about 2 minutes anyhow. So that window is actually quite small that you can actively trade. But when we look at a Cheltenham, you're going to have half-hour gaps between each individual race. And as soon as one race is finished, the money starts arriving on the next one. So you pretty much get half an hour to actively trade. So as a consequence, I think most people think that I'm using massive stakes and I'm, putting big orders in the market and calling it perfectly. No, I'm not. Because very often what I'm doing, because I've got much longer in the market, is I'm putting an order in, I'm taking an order out, I'm cancelling it, I'm scratching it, I'm trying another one, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and I'm just repeating that process continuously for a long period of time. And I'm not necessarily using large stakes. Now, when you look at the turnover that I do on that market, it will be large, but basically because I'm jumping in and out of the market repeatedly, I'm not actually having that much risk within the market. And that's the way typically you would compensate for having a traded range that is narrower than you would see in a normal market, something that's less volatile. So yeah, you don't have to raise your stakes because you can actually trade for much longer. And when we look at races like the Derby, liquidity continues, throughout the day. There's activity in the market all the time, and you get the same effect on something like the Grand National. That attracts liquidity over a long period of time. Now, you always get this upturn as we go into the later stages in the run-up to the start of the race. But for example, at Cheltenham, that will be 30 minutes. At the Grand National, when that previous race finishes at Aintree, money will come flooding in to the market. And as a consequence, you get, all of those sort of longer periods of activity that you can participate in. If you look at a normal race, it's going to be compressed into the very, very late stages of the race just before it starts. But on these big race meetings and these big races, you get an extended period of time to trade the market. So use that to your advantage. So I've often seen people complain that they don't like the way that the market works on these big races because everything just slows down. And I did find a comment somewhere once, I can't remember who said it, but I'll credit you at some point in the future if I ever remember, but they said it was like treacle trading, and that is true because the market really does slow down and it takes a lot of effort for money to move through a certain price and so on. But that actually should be to your advantage, because one of the things that you can do is you can look at all of the information available to you and you can make a much better judgment on your trade. I set up all of my screens, I'm looking at every piece of information that I can get in the market, and that just helps me trade it a little bit better. My strike rate is much lower on day-to-day racing, and it is super high on high-quality racing, and that is because I get more time to think about what I'm doing. I get more trades through because I've got longer, and I can use bigger stakes if I wanted to. So yeah, it's not necessarily a disadvantage, but it may feel unusual to you if you've never seen it before. So one of the things I always recommend is that you do a screen recording, because you can actually go back and have a look at how it traded. You can see if you can learn a little bit more information. And in fact, it gives you a much better view of exactly what's going on within that particular market. And even if you didn't understand it at the time, you can understand it afterwards by looking at it, and hopefully you can learn from that and use it in the other days of a multi-day racing festival. Now, of course, every now and again, an order will appear from nowhere and just move the price. And there isn't much you can do about that. That's just trading. When that happens to me, I just go, oh, well, I'll make a judgment on what my best position is at that particular moment and move on. But hopefully by then, I would have made a bit of money, which will soften the blow when something like that happens. But yeah, the market does behave differently, but use it to your advantage. So this is what a typical race at Cheltenham will sort of look like. But the thing that you should have a look at in this particular market is the amount of money that is being traded on the second favourite. Despite being at a higher price than the favourite, you can see there's a lot of money holding up the price. So if one of these two £10,000 breaks, then that could be a significant move underway. So as I've mentioned in this video, the markets move in slower motion. It gives you more time to digest what's going on within this particular market. And what you're looking at is at 3.35 and 3.4 in this particular market. We're looking very closely at the short-term traded volume that we can see on the right-hand side here. You can see there's reasonable amounts of backing going on at 3.35 and 3.4 on the second favourite. If we look at the favourite, you can see that there is more money coming at 2.76. So you can see fairly substantially there that the favourite appears to be being backed. But you can also see that that's happening on the second favourite, and you really can't have both being backed at the same time. They tend to interact quite closely. So if you're looking for a clue as to which is going in which direction, what's happening in the short term. But the most interesting clue that we got on this market was what happened next. So we're a little bit further on now, and we can see that the favourite is gradually getting more and more support. And if we bring our focus to the second favourite again, we can see that there's a slight imbalance here between the amount of money waiting at 3.35 and 3.4. You can see that's been corrected now. There's equal amounts, and then bang, you can see there was a big order went through at 3.4. That's shifted the price up by one tick. It's made an increase on the amount of volume, but that's also spread across 3.4 and 3.45. This tells us that somebody went in at this particular point in the market and placed a large lay order at 3.4. And you can see that that has set off a bit of a drift. And it's this sort of information that we're looking for. We're trying to assess what's happening on a short-term basis, what type of activity there is in the market. And this tells me on this particular race that the favourite is being backed. The second favourite's quite weak, and people are beginning to oppose it right now. So yeah, these are the sort of things that you would do, the sort of things that you'd be looking at when you're trading a market in this particular manner. But yeah, we can see that somebody actively laid the second favourite there, and if this volume on the right hand side continues to push in that direction, then we can expect the second favourite to drift. And the big advantage for us on this particular occasion is that the favourite is being backed anyway, so that lends weight to this particular position within the market. So what I'll do now is I'll speed up the video so you can see how the market sort of transpired from here. And it's very often a good thing to do to watch higher speed videos, because that makes the trend look smoother than if you're looking at it on a very short-term basis. So yeah, let's have a quick look at what happens to this market on the way to the official offer. So there are loads of opportunities at these big race meetings. You should be active in these markets. Ignoring them, ignore some of the best opportunities that you see over the year. I will always bang in big results at these races because they are like the perfect markets for me. They've got the right balance of volume, liquidity, the amount of time I can spend on the market, the sort of things that I can do. But if you've never traded them before, they can seem very, very alien. And of course, over the many years that I've been doing this, I've traded hundreds of these types of markets, but maybe you won't have done that, and therefore they will seem very different. So I suggest that you record them, you have a play around in them, and get used to the way that they behave, because there are tons of opportunities there, but they may just not be the same sort of opportunities that you tend to be used to on a day-to-day basis.